with our HRV, when we are experiencing lower HRV, what that generally is a function of is that we're asking our autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic branch, to send a lot of signals to the heart that are telling the heart to increase, right? And that when we're telling our heart to increase, we're also releasing adrenaline, epinephrine, cortisol. So all of these kind of, heart pumping type of hormones, which are really good when we need to be activated. But there's a lot of times throughout the day we do not need to be activated.
Right. Like when we're checking our email
we're checking our email. Exactly. And it is in those moments where we want to try to actively bring our heart rate down. So we're not in a situation where we're chronically activated throughout the day, because that is what will rear its head when we're trying to fall asleep at night and we're so activated that we can't wind down, or we're so tired that we fall asleep, but we end up having a fragmented sleep experience because we've allowed this stress to accumulate over the course of the day.
Hello, and welcome to Pursuing Health. I'm Dr. Julie Fouché, family physician and former CrossFit Games athlete. Here, I bring you information and inspiration to help bridge the gap between fitness and medicine and support your journey toward your healthiest self. Before we dive into the episode, I do want to make it clear that this podcast is for general information only and does not provide medical advice. I recommend that you seek assistance from your personal physician for any health conditions or concerns. Welcome to Pursuing Health. I am so excited to be here today with Kristen Holmes, who is the Vice President of Performance Science at Whoop. There she drives thought leadership by engaging with industry-leading researchers and partners to better understand individual, team, and organizational biometric and performance data across high-stakes verticals. We're going to dig into that today. Before she joined Whoop in 2016, she was the head field hockey coach at Princeton University, where she was one of the most successful coaches in Ivy League history, having won 12 league titles in 13 seasons and a national championship. Kristen was also an athlete in her own right. She was a 3-time All-American, 2-time Big Ten Athlete of the Year at the University of Iowa, competing in both field hockey and basketball, and recently inducted into the Hall of Fame class of 2021 and was a 7-year member of the U.S. national field hockey team. Kristen blends her academic and applied background in athletics, coaching, performance technology, psychology, and exercise physiology to drive research, partnership, and product development initiatives to strengthen Whoop as a leader in human performance. She holds a master's in psychology and sports performance from the University of the Rockies and is a PhD candidate in psychology at the University of Queensland. So welcome. That is quite the bio and so many things that I'm interested in chatting with you about today. So thank you so much for taking the time to join me, Kristen.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here, Julie. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'd love to start with some of your background. Obviously, you are steeped in athletics and sports ever since you were a child. But I'd love to know, was there a moment growing up when you realized, wow, I think I have potential to be a really good athlete, like maybe a college athlete or beyond that?
Yeah, well, I suppose you just start getting feedback from folks, and you start to have, I guess, some level of success. And, that I think is motivating and propels you to kind of work harder and to seek more opportunities to develop your skills. But I always loved team sports and just loved the whole thing, the competition, being part of a team and having this kind of bigger purpose. And so I really gravitated just to that at a very young age. Played a lot of basketball and then got into field hockey. I kind of exited soccer and started to spend a lot of time in field hockey. But I suppose, in 8th grade, 9th grade, I really, I just loved it so much. And, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, it didn't seem like work to me. I loved practicing, would spend, all my time playing basketball and field hockey and just loved every minute of it. So I figured, wow, if there's an opportunity to kind of ride this for as long as possible, I'm going to do it. So,
absolutely. Yeah. That's amazing. And so interesting, speaking of the psychology of it, that positive feedback loop of when you get positive reinforcement, then I think you sort of expand your horizons of what's possible and believe in yourself more. And then next thing you know, you're achieving these great things. I know that I can relate to that too with CrossFit. Within the first year of starting, I remember being at a local competition just at our gym and overhearing someone say, "Oh, I think she has potential to go to the games one day." And then being like, "Oh, maybe I do." And then, you believe it and it starts to change, your thoughts and your habits. And next thing you know, there you are.
Oh, so true. Yeah, I always feel, I feel so lucky that I had just extraordinary coaches, and, they had varying skill levels, but they're just such great people. And that's, I think having so many wonderful coaches really did inspire me to want to go into coaching and have the same sort of impact on student athletes. So just been very, very humbled and grateful for the type of coaches I've been able to interact with throughout my career.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And so then because of these great coaches and role models, you decided to go into coaching yourself, had a very successful coaching career. At what point was it that you started to understand the power of using data or wearable data in order to improve performance?
Yeah, I think early on in my coaching career, it's technically and tactically, quite a proficient coach, and really prided myself on, being able to put together game plans and coach the technical and tactical aspects of the game, but realized very quickly that it's just way more than the X's and O's, that only gets you so far. And that's actually when I really started to integrate a comprehensive performance education platform that really helped my student athletes understand the relationship between the psychology and the physiology on on arousal levels, so mental, physical, emotional arousal levels, because that's at the heart of performance. It's being able to modulate that, effectively to get the outcome that you want. Like you don't want to be too high, you don't want to be too low. You kind of want to get in that challenging zone. And a lot of that is mediated by how we manage our physiology and how we manage our psychology. So I started putting together kind of this very robust kind of framework that was simple, that helped my athletes understand, all right, if I do X, Y, and Z on the physiological side, if I do X, Y, Z on the psychological side, I can actually really start to modulate my arousal levels and really, choose my level of performance. So my intentional capacity, my effective effort, my energy production, motivation. So really started digging in deep, kind of in that realm and creating that framework.
Yeah. Can you give some examples of what those things would be on the physiological and psychological side?
Yeah. So in terms of a taxonomy, and this is what's wonderful, in the work that I do now is really researching, what are the kind of, influences on both the physiological and psychological side that actually do, move us around on the performance spectrum. And on the physiological side, you won't be surprised that sleep is
high on the list.
is at the very top. Really, we can go, weeks without eating and sleeping, without eating and drinking, fluids, but we go a week without sleep and we would be dead. So sleep is extraordinarily important. So that has always been a big piece of our performance framework is, okay, how do we figure out, I was at Princeton University, which is challenging on every levels, so competitive, very demanding. And, and it was seen as a weakness to sleep. Frankly, my student athletes had to hide their sleep.
Right, because they'd be seen.
Imagine that.
Why aren't you studying harder? Why aren't you working harder?
It was, and I don't mean to disparage. Obviously, it's.
But I think that's true in our culture in general.
It is. Yeah. So so I was always stomping around campus trying to not letting my student athletes go to kind of freshman orientation things at 1 a.m. And so I was people didn't like me on campus, but because I was trying to protect my student athletes from all of their vicious policies. But so sleep is at the very tippy top on the physiological side. And we could dig into that. There's lots of aspects of sleep: consistency, sufficiency, quality, and they all kind of one drives the other. But so there's a taxonomy kind of within sleep as well. And then recovery parameters are absolutely essential. So really understanding the relationship between stress and rest. What happens in these high performing, high stress environments, which is the subject of a lot of my research, is that the demand exceeds the capacity. It's very, very simple, right? That's it. And that is really what leads to burnout and what leads to depression and what leads to, just general, kind of feelings of dissatisfaction about your life. So really kind of modulating the stress and rest and being able to manage that effectively, I think is the skill. And then, appropriate training. So really thinking about volume and intensity and making sure that it's appropriate based on capacity. That's what Whoop is great. We've kind of got these two, recovery and strain, working together to kind of give you insight into how much, load you can take on. So really thinking about the training, obviously, and that's where we started to incorporate a lot of technology during our training. Kind of back to your original question about how did I get into technology is really to try to understand the stress rest balance, because it just when I started incorporating technology, it was about, 15 years ago. So I was a very, very early adopter when it comes to external load, internal load. We had tons of subjective markers as well. But what was interesting is, even though we were, kind of monitoring a ton of these internal parameters during training, it didn't actually predict next day capacity. So it wasn't actually what we're doing in training didn't actually predict how they show up tomorrow. So it's these other influences, it's the sleep, it's the kind of stress rest management outside of training, and also these psychological factors that I can get into as well that are bubble up to the surface. If you think about sleep, recovery, and training, balance, on the psychological side, it's, do I feel like what I'm doing aligns with what I care about? Is it really, is this enabling me? Is this thing that I'm doing? Is it an outlet for what I say I care about and what I value? And that's really kind of the purpose piece. Belongingness, connectedness is also in there, but it's kind of an interpersonal, influence. So I'm kind of thinking solely about the individual, so intrapersonal. But so purpose, efficacy, do I have the skills and resources to do what's asked of me on a daily basis? And then finally, control. And those are really our three core psychological needs that we have as human beings. And really, it's about having a framework across these 6 kind of influences to ensure that you're building strategies and routines to kind of account for them in an intentional way. If in fact you're really interested in being able to choose your performance levels.
Wow, so much that I want to dig into there. I think first, just pulling out this balance between stress and rest, I think is so interesting, especially looking at, college students. As when we're young and resilient, we don't do a great job of self-assessing probably that balance, because we can probably push ourselves a little bit harder and feel like we're recovering. But especially as we get older, or those stresses come from different places. Like we may think about, it's just the training load, but it is, like you said, it's all these other things that happen outside that training time. And I think that's true for all of us, no matter what our training looks like now, if it's going to the gym for an hour or, triathlon training or whatever it might look like, that's important, but probably more important are all these other factors outside that we're not as good at self-assessing. And that's where the data becomes really important.
Yeah, you hit on it. I think we're not good at perceiving our own, physical and cognitive declines, and I think that's where data really helped in my environment at Princeton and where it's been just, to see it in play across all of the teams and organizations that I work with now and to see folks kind of have that aha moment where, wow, I'm actually adapting to a lower level of performance here and didn't even know it, and that's where data can be, wildly beneficial to just kind of see the performance cost, I think, of not taking care of yourself. And then I think most importantly, then where to apply your effort. And I think that's where a lot of the confusion comes into play is, well, what do I actually need to do to improve my trajectory to, these biomarkers that we say are important to track? Like, how do I actually move them around in a way that is going to help me be a better version of myself, which I think is at the core what we're all striving to kind of create for ourselves is we want to show up with as much, mental, physical, and emotional capacity as possible so we can, be a positive influence on the people around us and be available, for life in ways that feel good to us. So, I think that's kind of the opportunity, I suppose.
Absolutely. And I see it, it's been so apparent to me seeing it in my practice with patients of some of the most basic things that we all know are good for us. Like you said, getting enough sleep, hydrating, rest, all these things that we know, that our grandmother told us were important for us. But when it's amazing the impact on human behavior change when we actually see our own personal data and what that can do. And then to be able to see the response, in a relatively short amount of time, when I change this behavior, this biomarker gets better, biometric gets better. So I think it's extremely powerful. Do we necessarily need the data in order to do all these things? Like if someone really did all the behaviors which have shown and proven to be important for our health, they could, but I think as humans, it's much more likely that we're going to do it when we see that data.
Yeah. And life changes too. And I think that's where the data can be helpful. You might you might have a birth of a child, or, you might have a parent who gets sick, like you might have relationship struggles. Like all of these things are going to impact, they're going to impact you, physiologically and psychologically, and having something to anchor to, I think, could be really helpful. And doing the little things that kind of can keep you on track in these moments where you're really stressed. And I think also too, ensuring that you are building a resilient base in the event that something in life does go wrong. You're invariably going to be able to cope with that stressor more effectively if you have this base of resilience. And that's actually what we saw in a huge study that we did. It's in peer review right now, but Dr. Chuck Seisler, who's a preeminent sleep scientist out of Harvard, was one of the principal investigators on the study. And what we did is we just retrospectively went back into our data set and looked at 3 months prior to quarantine and the 3 months post-quarantine. And sure enough, the individuals who were more physiologically and psychologically robust going into the pandemic and into quarantine were indeed, fared better than folks who were less physiologically and psychologically robust, which is not surprising. And one of the behaviors that we saw bubble to the surface as being most predictive of physiological and psychological resilience post-quarantine was sleep-wake behavior. So individuals with the more stable sleep-wake time were actually the ones who bubbled up as being the most resilient in the face of kind of all the quarantine parameters and everything, all the stress and uncertainty that moment in time kind of brought to individuals. So it's kind of this like interesting natural experiment we were able to do. And I will say, just to stay on the sleep-wake timing, is if you think about that physiological bucket, that first one being sleep, the most important behavior that drives the quality of sleep that we're spending, so the how efficient our sleep is actually the sleep-wake time. And I've seen that in research that I'm doing with frontline healthcare clinicians and with U.S. Army Alaska. It continually bubbles up as being the most predictive behavior of all the behaviors. It correlates to all sorts of things, but most importantly, physiological and psychological resilience.
That's incredible, and what an incredible opportunity we had, like you said, to be able to collect that data from this sort of big stressor. One of the silver linings, another silver lining, I suppose, of the pandemic. And fascinating about sleep-wake time. I know I first heard that from you when we did our panel at the CrossFit Games last year, and I was really blown away by that. And it's something I've been focusing on more and sharing more with my patients because I don't think a lot of people know about that.
Gosh, they don't. And I guess I truly can't underscore it enough, how important it is. Yeah. When you think about, your hormones, so you think about melatonin and cortisol and, just your ability to kind of build sleep pressure in the day in a way that is optimal, that cortisol release in the day. And I think coupling sleep-wake time with exposure to light and then the absence of light when you're trying to go to bed is also really, really critical. and usually folks who have stable sleep-wake time, generally speaking, are viewing light in the morning and are not viewing light in the evening at appropriate times. But those two kind of behaviors, I think, really go hand in hand. And we kind of call this like circadian health. And I think that's going to be, two words that you hear more and more because a lot of this research, I think, is coming out on how important this sleep-wake time is to our overall ability to cope and adapt to life demands. And then with that is really making sure we view bright light in the morning and then really taking away light when it's time to be sleepy. So after the sun's that's dimming light, really trying to be mindful of how we're interacting with, our devices, putting on those blue light filters, putting on the blue light glasses. So we're going into our sleep and we're enabling that melatonin to get released because what that blue light does is it basically inhibits melatonin production. So we have to be really careful about how we're viewing light as well.
Incredibly important. And like you said, impacting all of our hormones, all of our physiological function. And I know even down to our microbiome, there's so many different body systems that are entrained by that circadian rhythm.
Yep. Beautifully said.
That's incredible.
Yep.
Well, I want to dig more into some of these behaviors, but before we do, I was hoping you could give just a brief overview on heart rate variability or HRV and why it's important, because I think, that is a marker that now more people are aware of and testing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think something that gives such a objective view into our overall sort of stress load and resilience.
Yeah, absolutely. So HRV, heart rate variability, is simply the time interval between heartbeats, and your HRV it's a function of the heart, but it originates in our autonomic nervous system. And our autonomic nervous system has two branches: the parasympathetic and the sympathetic, and they are both competing to send signals to the heart. The more recovered you are, the more capable your heart is going to be to respond to those signals from the autonomic nervous system. The less recovered you are, the less responsive your heart is going to be to those signals. So how this plays out in the real world is if I'm trying to react to a bus that I just saw that's coming.
Mm-hmm.
The less recovered I am, the less variable my heart is, the less responsive I'm going to be to that demand.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when you think about this in the context, if you are kind of measuring these biomarkers and you're measuring heart rate variability, and you wake up and there's a huge deviation from your baseline, and let's say you get a recovery score, readiness score, and it's you're in the red, it doesn't mean you're going to get hit by a bus. But it does mean that your heart is simply less responsive to these signals that are coming from your autonomic nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
And the parasympathetic is really kind of that rest and digest, that deactivating branch of the nervous system. Okay, it's going to tell your heart to reduce or decrease. The sympathetic is the activating branch, or the fight or flight, and that's going to tell your heart rate to jack up. And again, when the less recovered we are, the less responsive our heart is going to be to the inputs, the signals that our autonomic nervous system is trying to send to the heart. So the higher your heart rate variability relative to your own baseline, the more capable you are to adapt to the demands of your environment. Okay, the more resilient you're going to be in the face of stress.
That is one of the best descriptions I've heard of HRV. I love that. And it makes me think about, just as an analogy, it makes me think about reaction time. Like as an athlete, if you're in a sport where 100%. You need to react quickly,
yes,
you're going to be more successful versus if you didn't get enough sleep the night before and you're a little sluggish and slow, or you're me and never played ball sports growing up and your reaction time is just always slow.
Without a doubt. I mean, you think about it from the perspective of contact sports,
Mm-hmm.
Just imagine like when you see generally there isn't a linear relationship between sleep and HRV, but so they're not collinear, but they're obviously very strongly correlated. So if we're going into a situation where we're under recovered, it could be a variety of situations that impact our HRV rate. It's not just sleep; it's a whole host of things, which makes it a really powerful marker because it's, but more confusing, I guess, in terms
Mm-hmm.
of unpacking where is the origin of my low HRV, and I can dig into that if you want. But you think about it for sports, for example. Yeah, you're just seeing your peripheral vision actually decreases.
Wow.
With
mm-hmm.
When you're less recovered.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we have good research, showing sleep deprivation actually narrows your field of vision. And you can think about sleep, when you are sleep deprived and you've got low HRV, now you're really going into the game with a pretty huge handicap. And you just increase your chances of getting injured, frankly, because you just can't see as well. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of reasons to kind of think about it in an intentional way. But yeah, absolutely for contact sports, it's really important to understand how this marker could be used to keep folks safe.
And I noticed you said that it's important to look at relative to your baseline. Can you explain that? Because I think sometimes when people first see their HRV, they're maybe comparing it to, their friend or family member. And how do we think about HRV absolute numbers?
Yeah, it's it's based on age, and it declines over time. But it is modifiable, so you can definitely slow that decline, no question. I can dig into that, but so age, genetics, your heart size. I mean, there's lots of things that are going to influence your HRV. I think too, behaviors leading up to that moment are also going to influence your baseline. So if you're a heavy drinker, alcohol, if you're typically not sleeping a lot, like whatever your baseline would be in the moment that you start measuring it could have potentially been higher if you weren't like crushing yourself for the, 30 years
However
prior
many
to that
years,
moment. Yeah. So I think that is important to mention because those are the exact behaviors that you can modify in order to actually improve your situation. So I just think it's important to kind of make that connection for folks, but it's really you against you, is important to note. I will say that a lot of the more, kind of elite athletes who come on the platform, tend to have higher HRV. But it is based on your genetics and, and your age.
Got it. So you mentioned sleep wake time and circadian rhythm training to have a big impact on a recovery. From all of the data that you've seen, what are some of the other behaviors that have shown to have the biggest impact on our HRV?
Yep. So definitely that circadian health bucket. So, so sleep wake time, light behavior, is going to be massive, just because of its role in impacting every cell in our body and tells everything in our body what to do. I would say meal timing is another one that's really important. A lot of the work that's come out of Sachin Panda's lab, suggests that we need to kind of restrict our feeding windows. And this makes sense when we think about it in the context of our circadian rhythm. If we're asking our system to, digestion is super effortful, right? So it really takes a lot of effort. So, and it's a parasympathetic activity. So imagine when we're trying to digest food, a lot of the other restorative activities that, should be going on with our organs and, all of our cellular cleanup and mitochondria function, all of that are kind of not able to fire on all cylinders because we're trying to deal with the food that's in our gut. So, so it makes sense that, if you eat a lot over the course of, 14, 15, 16 hours or whatever, you'll probably wake up with a lower HRV. It's because you've been asking your body to do two things at once, and it just doesn't do that very well. So you want to try to restrict your feeding window so you give your body ample time to be in this parasympathetic state. And that generally is happening during sleep. So really minimizing food prior to sleep, if you can do it, try to give yourself a 3-hour window to where you stop eating before you intend to sleep. So then you're not, diverting resources during sleep toward digestion. You can really focus on all the restorative things that need to be happening during sleep. So think about your fast kind of starting that 2 to 3 hours prior to when you sleep, and then you get your 8 or so hours of sleep. So you've got this like nice big window where you're actually not eating any food. If you can extend that a little bit longer, to kind of 14 hours, and then your feeding window is 10 or even 16 hours, and your feeding window is 8. That's probably ideal from what we've seen in the literature so far.
And I think that's a great point, because so many people, I think when they think intermittent fasting, they're often doing that fasting window in the morning. They're skipping breakfast, whereas maybe, culturally it's a little hard to skip dinner, but if you can move that dinner time earlier and have more of a window where you're not eating before bedtime, maybe that's a little bit more sort of in alignment with our evolutionary development.
Yeah. And if you can, just to maybe delay breakfast slightly, so so you're kind of getting that extra couple hours in the morning, that could be great. But yeah, just moving that feeding window around a little bit. And like I said, 2 hours before you intend to sleep is generally enough. If you can couple it with a walk after dinner, that will also help things. And also, it minimizes your glucose variability if you can do a walk after your meal at night. And I think it reduces it by up to maybe 14, I have to fact check this, by up to 14%. So it's quite meaningful. So just a nice 10-minute stroll after dinner will help you metabolize that glucose more effectively. And that could maybe give you a little extra time, like a little more time, I guess. Whereas instead of maybe the 3 hours, you can get away with the 2 or maybe even an hour and a half if you're getting in that post meal walk.
And that's the beauty of having this data, right? You can play around with it and see what works for you.
Yeah, you can run just these like little N of 1 experiments because, we're all so different, how I might respond or I metabolize food differently, and the content of what we're eating and the quality of what we're eating is different. So yeah, so starting, do these many experiments to kind of see, how what is best for you, I think is the path. So sleep wake timing, light exposure, meal timing, exercise timing is another lever that we can pull that helps our body anticipate what's going to happen. So all of these circadian kind of health that influence our recovery and our HRV and our ability to adapt, increase our resilience. Exercise timing is another cue that our body really likes to entrain to. So if we can keep our exercise windows in a time where it's not going to phase, shift our circadian, advance or delay our circadian clock. It's kind of ideal. So anytime between, 10 and 4 p.m. is 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. You're not going to phase or delay your circadian rhythm. And then if you want to, phase advance or phase delay, you use these levers to do just that. You light a little bit later if you want to go to sleep a little bit later. You light a little bit earlier if you want to go to bed a little earlier. So there's, you can kind of play with these if you're looking to kind of shift your clock a little bit. Those are the levers to do that. And then, so the circadian health and then in the recovery bucket, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I can get into. One of which is, related to to breath, to breathing. I think with our HRV, when we are experiencing lower HRV, what that generally is a function of is that we're asking our autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic branch, to send a lot of signals to the heart that are telling the heart to increase, right? And that when we're telling our heart to increase, we're also releasing adrenaline, epinephrine, cortisol. So all of these kind of, heart pumping type of hormones, which are really good when we need to be activated. But there's a lot of times throughout the day we do not need to be activated.
Right. Like when we're checking our email
we're checking our email. Exactly. And it is in those moments where we want to try to actively bring our heart rate down. So we're not in a situation where we're chronically activated throughout the day, because that is what, will rear its head when we're trying to fall asleep at night and we're so activated that we can't wind down, or we're so tired that we fall asleep, but we end up having a fragmented sleep experience because we've allowed this stress to accumulate over the course of the day. So breathing, incorporating breath work throughout the day, these mini moments of rest can be super, super powerful. And it doesn't have to be a long time. In fact, in a research study that we just completed with Dr. Huberman's lab at Stanford, we found that we did a whole kind of test on all these different breathing protocols. So mindful breathing, box breathing. We tested the physiological sigh, and we tested Tumo breathing. And we basically wanted to see what happens physiologically, what happens psychologically to folks when they do these different breath works for 5 minutes a day. And what we saw in this research is that the folks who did the physiological sigh, which is a double inhale and an exhale, experienced the greatest change in HRV, so the greatest deactivation, so parasympathetic saturation during this 5 minutes of physiological sigh breathing. So, and you just do that for 5 minutes.
Okay.
So just as many cycles as you can in 5 minutes, but just, not just a nice gentle effort. We saw decreases in resting heart rate, increases in resting heart rate and in HRV, and decreases in resting heart rate, increases in feelings of well-being, better sleep. And I think what was really cool is the ability to regulate one's state away from the breathwork session. So, and the decreases in anxiety. So it was really, it was an awesome study, really well designed. It's in peer review right now. So hopefully, these are preliminary data, but when we think about, and this is a lot of what my work at Whoop revolves around, is really trying to figure out, what are these things that move the needle the most? Okay. Sleep wake time, and we see is just by far. Physiological sigh is another behavior that we know mediates heart rate variability. The other technique that I would say is the most efficacious in mediating heart rate variability, and there's decades of research around this, is a technique called resonance frequency breathing. And this is basically a biofeedback technique. So you can go online and you can find what your optimal frequency is. And it's basically just mapping your heart rate, your respiratory rate, and your kind of cardiac system. You try to getting them as kind of in sync, or, in resonance or coherence as possible. And adults typically breathe at any rate, between 12 and 24 breaths per minute. This technique cuts that in half. So anywhere from 3 to 7 breaths per minute in this kind of cadence. So mine is kind of a 6 to 4 ratio, but everyone's is a little bit different. And that's kind of the magic of this. And it takes about, if you just go online and Google resonance frequency breathing, you can kind of do these different tests to figure out like what your optimal frequency is.
Okay.
But if you do this 10 to 20 minutes a day, it's been shown to increase heart rate variability. It helps decrease tons of symptoms related to post-traumatic stress disorder, symptoms of depression. It has been shown to reduce chronic pain. It's a really when you can breathe in this kind of way that increases cardiac and respiratory coherence, it has incredible downstream effects. And it's been clinically validated. These are quite significant in terms of the effects of the effect of this breathing on these various symptoms. So,
wow, that's amazing. I had not heard of that breathing technique before. I'm excited to try it out.
So those are two that are pretty amazing. And then I think anything that is inducing stress and kind of creating hormesis, which is the positive adaptation to stress, is good. So cold. Getting in a cold tub can be pretty amazing. Sauna has been shown to, increase this hormetic effect and improve HRV. And then exercise. Zone 2, I would put that in the recovery bucket. In addition to physiological sigh, resonance frequency breathing, hot, cold. Zone 2 would be kind of my in the top of the list. And that's basically just, conversational pace, nice, easy, a run, a bike, a swim, whatever modality is feels kind of easy to you, but just kind of keeping it in that nice low zone. It's been really showed to improve mitochondrial health. And then I would say, hydration is in that recovery bucket. Mobility is so big. Lots of research kind of correlating our mobility with longevity. So you want to be able to lift things over your head. And so, that's getting into the training bucket in terms of how we need to lift, but making sure that we're mobile and thinking about our mobility is really important. And then contemplative practice, I think, is definitely. So those are my top 8, I guess, based on all of the literature and all the meta-analysis. That's amazing. But those are based on all of the research that we're doing internally, and then all of the external research that I've looked at. Those are the big movers, I think, in our physiology.
I love it. I'd love to dig into more what you mean when you say contemplative practice.
So this would be prayer. This would be, gratitude practice, journaling. Some of, I kind of stick to the ones that are, what I love about breath work is that it's very prescriptive and it's specific, whereas some of these other modalities can be a little bit more non-specific in that they're harder to do well. It's easy to follow a breathing protocol. Like it's easy to do box breathing. It's easy to do the physiological side because you're literally just following a breath rate. Whereas when you get into, contemplative practices, they could be a little less prescriptive and therefore we're not quite sure the effect that it's really having on the physiology. But I will say that I think there's, we've got thousands and thousands of years of evidence where prayer is really powerful. Gratitude practice is really powerful. And I think, having, building those practices into your framework, is I think really important. And I think about it in terms of using those practices to be able to gain more control over your attention and over your thoughts. I think especially in today's world where there's so many things competing for our attention, so many really tempting things, and having time by ourselves is becoming less without all of these distractions, without using our phone. It's becoming, I think it's actually the superpower of the 21st century is really being able to control your thoughts and your attention, but it's a skill you have to develop. And I think contemplative practice is a path to being able to control our thoughts and intention, and really be able to grasp onto the things that are truly rewarding to us. But if we don't take that time out to sit and listen to our thoughts, we don't know. We end up kind of flinging ourselves in all of our directions. I mean, all directions. So, in my view, it's the most important. It's hard to talk about because it is so non-specific.
Sure.
And, I'm kind of a data person, but I know for me that if I didn't have this grounding practice every day, I would not be able to accomplish the things that I do over the course of the day and feel good about just how I'm moving about in the world.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah. And I agree with you 100% from a N of one standpoint and I'd love to dig into this a little bit more too, about just the impact of, we've mentioned a few times, emotional regulation and being able to modulate in different situations. But, we know that, our thoughts then influence the emotions that we feel. And the more that we are able to be aware of those thoughts and have some ability to regulate and modulate, that impacts our emotional state as well. And all these other resilience factors. So I'll share a little personal story, but last week was a great example. We know these things, but it's always interesting to test them and reaffirm how important they are. But I had last week, I went to a college reunion. So I had alcohol like 3 nights in a row, like a drink, and which I don't normally do. Didn't sleep much because we were up until 2 or 3 in the morning, and then went right into a work offsite where it was like scheduled all day, every day for 3 days. So that meant my sleep, like if I pull up my Whoop screen, I've got, you probably can't even see, I don't know if you can see this on the screen, but you've got basically 3 days of 69, 75, 75%. And then now I'm back up to 100. I'm feeling more like myself, but
I love it.
It was that combined with, my HRV took a plummet, combined with not doing my normal morning full contemplative practice. Like it was this abbreviated version of, okay, I'm trying to balance how much sleep I get versus how much time do I have doing things like prayer and journaling and gratitude and meditation. And I took a big hit. So not only am I seeing it in my data, but I did not feel like myself. I was I had an extremely hard time regulating my emotions. Like little things that would normally not bother me were really getting to me. And, now having a few days to reset into my normal routine, I feel like a completely different person. I feel more resilient, sort of mentally, emotionally, physically. And so sometimes, it takes those reminders for us to know how important those behaviors are.
I know. Well, it's a great story. And I mean, we hear those stories from our members and customers all the time. It's like it's really, in some ways, validated to kind of see in the data, the behaviors, and then actually, think about how am I actually feeling, and be like, it lines up. Like I don't feel like I have the ability to regulate my emotions. And we see this, in our data. We're doing some research with executives. So 100 executives, sorry, I just have to choose my words to make sure I don't out anyone here. 100 executives, so hard charging folks. And what we're, one of the areas that we're examining in the study is this relationship between stress, HRV, sleep, and executive function. And one of the things that we saw emerge in the data is this really strong statistically significant relationship between sleep debt. So the difference between what Whoop says you need versus what you got. So in the screenshot that you shared, you have the 300%. So that's Whoop telling you how much you need to spend in bed, Julie, and then you actually spending that in bed, 100%. So the delta between what you needed versus what you get is basically the sleep debt metric. And you can find that by clicking on sleep need. And that sleep debt, what we see is that for every 45 minutes that folks accumulate of sleep debt, it actually correlates to next day executive function and working memory.
Wow.
Our ability to kind of regulate, make decisions and regulate our emotions, and is really tied to the sleep debt metric. The other thing that we see is that my sleep debt doesn't just affect me, it affects my team as well. And there's a relationship between, we saw this in our part 2 of the study, is that we basically asked the direct reports of these CEOs to kind of evaluate how psychologically safe they felt. And we saw a statistically significant relationship between the psychological safety of the team and the CEO's sleep debt.
That is powerful. And just
crazy, right?
The impact of that on, a company's productivity, team's productivity, the whole, like you said, psychological well-being of everyone involved. And probably the 45 minutes lost in sleep, you're losing way more than that in terms of your productivity the next day.
It's $4.3 million. And Google did a huge study. So teams that felt less psychologically safe, reduced their profitability by $4.3 million.
Wow. That's incredible.
Isn't that just insane?
The power of data, right? Now, instead of having to go around Princeton's campus and telling everyone to sleep, now you have data.
Exactly. No, I think like more importantly though, think about like, I'm just, I wake up with, a couple hours, and some of these folks are walking around with 3 hours of sleep debt. We're just talking about 45 minutes, it's just huge amounts of sleep debt. So they like plod, they kind of grind through the day, right? Trying to keep it all together. What happens when they get home?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. At the end of the day, it's even worse, I bet. When you interview their families.
Can you even imagine? Because that's where, the data shows that's where we're at our worst is with the people that we love and that we're trying to care for. And so, I mean, I can go on and on about sleep deprivation, but, and some folks, and that's why I'm really spending a lot of my time in these higher stress, higher stakes environments where their job, you think about frontline healthcare clinicians and the amount of circadian desynchronization, those folks, it's just as part of their job, so really investigating, okay, what are these levers that we can pull to kind of mitigate some of the effects of just not being able to have stable sleep-wake time all the time and viewing light when we should be sleeping. And, this has like a knockoff effect on, every system and cell in our body, that impacts our longevity and it impacts our ability to, be the parent that I want to be and the spouse that I want to be. And so, I have like my heart really goes out to those folks and a lot of reasons why we're doing this research is to try to help specifically night shift workers to really understand, what are the little things that we can do that will have a meaningful impact,
Absolutely. And it reminds me of what you said at the beginning about the things that we need as humans, basic needs, and one being control. And I think for so many people who have this dysregulated work schedule, there's so much of a loss of sense of control. But if there are a few levers, like you said, that we know can make a difference, that can maybe restore some of that back to know, okay, there's something I can do about this to mitigate, maybe the negative effects.
Exactly. And it's really housed in some of those recovery behaviors, and definitely, you can still manipulate light, even if you're working, during the night and sleeping during the day, like, really thinking really clearly about that. I mean, and then food is the other huge one that can be a super powerful lever, in the presence of a shorter sleep and maybe, a fragmented sleep experience.
Which is huge. And which is also extremely hard because when you are sleep deprived, your food cravings are more intense. You crave carbs, your insulin resistance increases. So it's a tough one to overcome. But if you have that sort of knowledge, that can make a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I would love to talk about how you put all of this into practice personally, because I remember being so impressed hearing you talk on our panel at the games. Like, wow, this woman she really practices what she preaches. She protects all of these behaviors in herself because she sees the data and how powerful it is. And so I'd love for you to just share, what does this look like in your life, knowing how important some of these behaviors are, and how do you make sure that you protect them, even though, we live in the world we live in today?
Yeah, I definitely am one of those folks who takes a lot of pride in making sure that I am practicing what I preach. I think that's extremely important. And most importantly, I'm trying to be the best possible role model for my kids. I have 2 children and, who mean everything to me. And, I just want to be as present and as available for them as I can. And I know if I don't take care of my mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being, like I simply can't be that for them. So, I mean, I just have kind of taken all of this research and just created a a routine that I just try to stick to as much as I can. And it's not perfect. I travel a fair amount for work, so it gets, out of whack every now and again, but I just think about it. All right, I've got 30-ish days in the month, and I'm just trying on average to do these things as much as possible. So definitely stabilizing my sleep wake time. That is number one for me, and light. So that's almost non-negotiable. And when I travel, to the West Coast, for example, I live on the East Coast. I try to actually maintain my home time zone when I travel. So if I go to the Midwest, I generally speaking, I'm trying to, I go to bed when I normally would on the East Coast. So I try to keep consistent as possible. And I think that you kind of alluded to it a little bit, in the time that we live. My social circle is pretty small, honestly. And I only do that because I'm just the type of person who I don't like complexity. Like, I like things to be really simple. I like to know what I need to focus on. And if, you're in my circle, then I give you everything that I can. But you can't do that across a lot of folks. So I'm really intentional about, kind of the people I spend time with, and making sure that they support my values. And so I think pretty intentionally about that. I definitely build in a gratitude practice every day, and do a lot of mindful walking, without my technology. That has proven to be really powerful for me personally, just back to kind of the controlling one's thoughts and intentions, and really centering around the things that I want to be paying attention to, and making sure those things that I'm paying attention to are actually serving me. Because a lot of our thoughts are just absolute nonsense, and they can kind of take control of our behaviors in insidious ways, in ways that we don't even know it's happening. So I think thinking about that proactively is really important. And then, hydration. I really don't drink alcohol, very rarely, because that's just, I think, kind of a crusher. It just
We've all seen it on our Whoop data for wearing
I
one.
mean, it's the aha moment for a lot of folks, honestly.
A lot of people.
Yeah. And so I'm really careful about, when I drink, and if I drink, and if I do, it's usually just one. So I definitely have kind of almost completely cut out alcohol. And just lots of vegetables, and, high quality proteins. So, think about that, and just the timing of eating. I kind of stick to an 8 to 10 hour feeding window.
What does that look like schedule wise? Like, when are you, like, especially with kids and, family, when do you wake up? How do you guys do dinner? Things like that.
Yeah. So generally speaking, so they usually get home from sports in the spring. It varies. My son plays ice hockey, so winter is a little bit more variable in terms of when he gets home. But generally speaking, we're kind of sitting down around 5:36 for dinner. So usually that's, like, for the most part, prepared, and do a lot of meal prep on Sunday, getting kind of just like the staples. So I always make a breakfast every morning. And that's been one great thing with quarantine. Like, all of a sudden we're kind of working from home. And so I love being able to get up and make them breakfast, and then they're off to school. And then, they eat generally at school. I usually eat around 10 or 11. It does depend when I'm going to work out. I kind of, some days I'll wait till after my workout. And then other days I'll work out, or I'll eat, like this morning I ate around 9, and then I'll work out at noon. So it just kind of depends on when I'm going to be working out, but I usually try to work out between that 10 and 3 p.m. window. That's just like when I feel like I want to work out, and usually, like, from 7 to 7:30 to 12, I'm most, like, cognitively, like, firing all cylinders. So I try to, like, just jam on as much work as possible. And then the afternoon, I, typically have external meetings or whatnot. And then, we eat around 5:30, and then, I mean, I pretty much after 6, like, I don't really eat a whole lot. Every now and again I'll have, if I found that I've had, a bit of a kind of high, like anxious day where I wasn't able to get in my breath work. Typically after every 90-minute block of work or so, I'll do 5 minutes of resonance frequency breathing or 5 minutes of physiological sigh.
I love that.
Definitely do. Yeah. Like I definitely do like at least 3 to 5 bouts of breath work from anywhere from 90 seconds to 5 minutes throughout the day.
That's amazing. It's a good Pomodoro technique. Have you heard of that?
Yeah.
That's a great idea on your breaks to do the breath work.
Yep. Without a doubt. And I've been pretty consistent with that for like the last 4 years. And that's been a huge game changer. I definitely see my HRV, when I came out of the platform, it was 60 milliseconds and it's like 110, I think.
It's amazing.
My average. So it's a pretty big increases just with these like lifestyle changes. And then I'm usually in bed at like 8:45 and I read. I usually print out the journals because I'm working on I'm close to finishing my PhD. So usually like at night I'm just reading journals and then and then I'm usually asleep by 9:30 and I wake up around 5:36.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. I think it just gives a lot of context and, real world. How do you put this into practice? Well,
for sure.
I know we are almost out of time, but I would love to wrap up with, and we've probably covered a lot of these things already, but the 3 questions I ask everyone at the end of the podcast. So the first one is to just reiterate, what are the 3 things that you do on a regular basis that have the biggest positive impact on your health?
Yeah. Sleep wake time, no question. And I would say just awareness of the things that I value and care about and making sure that my behaviors align with those things. I think when there's dissonance when we don't align our values and behaviors, we get this cognitive dissonance that in psychology, that's a term where we basically feel pretty shitty about our life. So I try to avoid that. So just awareness, first of all, okay, what is it that I want to be thinking about? What is it I care about?
Yes.
What are my values? And just making sure that I have outlets for the things that I say I care about. And then just taking stock and aligning my values and behaviors. And, I really think about that and meditate on that daily. So I think that's probably number 2, sleep wake time, because that's the one behavior that basically puts all of these other things that I talk about in motion. That's my anchor behavior, no question. Everyone needs to find their own like anchor behavior, but that's for me, that sets me off in the right path across these other behaviors. And then, value behavior alignment, I think is 2. And then I would say, it sounds silly, but like just drinking water.
It's like basic things to remember. Yeah.
I just find that, I guess that's like another like core anchor behavior. Like when I'm drinking water, like, I don't know, just things are good, and I always feel like so lucky, to like have like fresh, clean water that I can drink. And it's like so vital for like healthy functioning. My workouts are better. Like I can think more clearly. So water.
That's amazing. Good gratitude for water.
Yeah, exactly.
What's one thing that you think or based on the data would have an impact, but you have a hard time implementing, or one of those things that maybe, is the first to go when you're traveling or things get a little crazy?
Yeah. I mean, first to go when I'm traveling is probably the light behavior. I find that harder to control. Oftentimes, let's say I'm in a hotel and I'm on the 12th floor and I'm like having to, I wake up, I'm getting ready, like, and then it's 2 hours have gone by and I haven't been outside yet, so I'm getting sunshine. When we talk about like light exposure, what I mean is that you want to get outside in the natural light for 5 to 10 minutes, even on a cloudy day, but that light into the retinas basically tells our control center of our brain what the heck to do. And, depriving your body of that moment has huge downstream effects to our overall kind of health and wellness. So light behavior, like I'm super diligent at home. It's really easy. I just walk outside on my porch and there it is. But yeah, when I'm traveling in hotels, and I find that I end up neglecting that. So
for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. Last question is, what does a healthy life look like to you?
Living my values with joy and energy. I think that's like, honestly, like the reason why I do all this is because I want to be able to have, the energy and to really like just live the things that I care about.
That's amazing. Amazing. And for so many people, I think knowing your values, number one, and then living them, aligning your behaviors.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Wow.
Yeah. I think it's an important exercise for everyone to think about, and they change, and it's okay for them to kind of change. Yeah. They, you might have a core set that are pretty stable across your life, but I think I always tell my kids, like, it's okay to change your mind, but think about who you want to be in the world, like, cause your identity, like your choices and your behaviors are either going to reinforce that identity or they're not. And I think when we don't, am I going to be the girl who parties and eats the whole pizza, or am I going to be the girl who's waking up early and practicing, or, it's like you figure out, okay, who am I actually going to be in this world? And making sure that whoever I say I want to be, like, my behaviors match that.
Yeah. And when you spend time really defining those, it makes it easy to make those decisions in the moment, because you know what your values are, and okay, this is the person I'm going to be. These are the decisions that person makes.
Yeah. That's well said.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Kristen. There's so many other things. We might have to do a part 2 to talk about so many other things, including, women's health. We didn't even really get into that, but we'll get there. We'll get there maybe in a follow-up. But I really enjoyed this time. I really just appreciate the role model that you are, the passion that you bring to your work, and how much, work you're doing to bring this truth out into the world and share it with people so that we can all live healthier and happier lives. So thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on. It's a real honor.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoy listening to the podcast, please consider subscribing and giving it a 5-star rating on iTunes. It really does help to get the word out to more people.